Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us a fascinating stack of material today, all focused on, well, one central challenge, the official story of global development.
That's right.
We're going deep into the hidden history of how nations actually get rich. And according to these sources, it often involves policies that are the complete opposite of what's advised for developing countries today.
Exactly. We're looking at sources that really dissect what's been called the golden straitjacket of globalization.
Yeah.
This mandatory package of free trade, privatization, and minimal government.
Right.
And the mission here is to show that the path preached by today's rich nations is, well, it's not the path they took themselves. It's really a look at strategic government intervention versus market orthodoxy.
Okay, let's unpack this with a thought experiment that I think sets the stage perfectly. We're jumping forward in time. It's the year 2061.
Okay.
Imagine a company in Mozambique, just announces this monumental breakthrough in hydrogen fuel cell technology.
And this isn't some overnight success. The sources are clear on this. Tres Estrellas started way back, 1968, exporting low-value cashew nuts. Then it strategically moves into textiles, and finally it makes a really bold entry into electronics, subcontracting for a giant like Samsung.
And the key detail here is the patience. Their R&D for fuel cells. It ran at a loss for 17 years.
Yeah.
17. And when shareholders got antsy, the CEO famously said that building a world-class furnace requires a long preparatory period.
So that's the fictional success story, a nation using state-backed patience to climb that ladder. But now let's contrast it with the grim reality of a country that actually did it, South Korea.
Okay, so back to 1961.
Yeah. In 1961, Korea was just devastated. It was recovering from a war that had wiped out, 75% of its manufacturing. Its per capita income was $82. That's less than half of Ghana's at the time.
Wow. And the U.S. aid agency, USAID, they basically wrote them off. They called South Korea a bottomless pit.
A bottomless pit. Yet, and this is the really astonishing fact you have to grapple with, within 40 years, Korea transforms. It becomes a high-tech powerhouse, exporting phones, semiconductors, you name it.
A transformation that took the UK 2 centuries, Korea did in just a couple of generations.
And what's fascinating and central to our whole deep dive today is that they did it by not following the playbook. They actively intervened, they protected, and they subsidized their way right up the value chain.
Which brings us to this core argument, this kicking away the ladder analogy. Can you explain why that's such a powerful image for this historical hypocrisy?
It's powerful because it's so direct. It's about a deliberate act. Wealthy countries used every tool in the book, protectionist tariffs, state subsidies, even stealing technology, to climb to the top.
To build their own furnaces, so to speak.
Exactly. And once they were at the top, they turned around and preached free markets and open borders to the countries below them. If those countries actually follow that advice, they can never build up the industrial muscle to compete. The ladder is kicked away.
And the greatest irony here often involves the UK, the nation we all associate with Adam Smith and the birth of free market capitalism.
Absolutely. Everyone knows Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, the ultimate symbol of the self-reliant free market man.
Right.
But his lesser-known economic book, A Plan of the English Commerce, shows a completely different side. He was a huge advocate for state protection, for aggressive subsidies to build up Britain's woolen manufacturing. He knew Britain's strength wasn't an accident of the market, it was policy.
And you see that protectionist impulse everywhere back then. Henry VII didn't just hope for the best. He secretly recruited skilled workers from abroad?
He did. He brought them over, gave them housing, workshops, exclusive rights, anything to make sure their skills were transferred to England.
And it wasn't just about building up their own industries. It was about actively stopping others from doing the same.
Oh, for sure. In the 18th century, Prime Minister Robert Walpole passed laws that banned the American colonies from making high-value steel products.
Right.
They were forced to just export the raw, low-value stuffed pig and bar iron.
It's incredible. That's the 18th century version of a trade deal that locks a developing country into just exporting raw materials.
It's the exact same logic. And the U.S. story, well, and mirrors this perfectly. The U.S. is the champion of free trade today, but historically, it was one of the most protectionist economies on Earth.
Let's talk about Alexander Hamilton. His infant industry program is, it's foundational here. He was arguing against Thomas Jefferson's whole agrarian vision.
He was. Hamilton argued for massive tariffs, sometimes up to 50%, plus government support to shield America's new industries. The whole point was to give them breathing room to grow and get good at this stuff before having to face the British manufacturing machine.
And how long did that way of thinking dominate U.S. policy?
Remarkably, it was the core of U.S. economic policy right up until the end of World War I.
This is where it gets so interesting, connecting that history to now. The sources point out that if a finance minister today tried to implement Hamilton's policies,
Oh, they'd be crucified. High tariffs, big subsidies, state-directed investment. The IMF and the World Bank wouldn't just deny them loans. They would actively try to have that person removed from office.
it's a perfect illustration of the double standard.
Just think about Japan. If Japan had been forced into that golden straitjacket in the 1960s, Toyota probably would have gone under or just become a small part supplier for a Western company. The Lexus brand, which Friedman loved to use as an icon of globalization, literally wouldn't exist.
That structural reality just forces us to look at the data. So when developing countries ignored that consensus and used strategic intervention, say in the 60s and 70s, what happened?
The growth was just, well, it was demonstrably faster. Developing countries were averaging about 3% annual per capita growth during that era of more state control.
Okay, and how does that compare to the neoliberal era that followed, from the 80s onward?
The rate plummeted. It fell to 1.7%.
And even that lower number is a bit misleading, isn't it?
It is, yeah. That 1.7% average is massively propped up by China and India, two giants that very pointedly refuse to adopt the full golden straitjacket. If you take them out of the equation, the performance of the rest of the developing world looks even worse.
So the principle behind this earlier success is the infant industry thesis. You used an analogy before about your son, Jingyu. You wouldn't throw a 6-year-old into the workforce.
Of course not. No matter how clever he is, a child needs a protected environment, years of school, of learning, before they can compete as an adult. It's the same for an economic sector. Protection isn't meant to be forever, but it's essential for a time to master technology and build competence against global giants.
But the conventional wisdom says that throwing them in the deep end forces them to learn to swim. It forces efficiency. What happens in the real world when countries do that?
You often get disaster. I mean, look at Mexico after NAFTA. That sudden trade liberalization just wiped out industries that had been built over decades. It led to slower growth and a huge unemployment problem. They just weren't ready.
Or Ivory Coast, right. A 40% tariff cut in 1986 just collapsed their domestic chemistry, textile, and shoe industries.
Gone. The theory that all that capital and labor would just magically shift into some new, globally competitive sector, it completely failed to materialize.
And this ties directly into intellectual property rights, or IPR. This is a really powerful modern tool for kicking away the ladder.
It was maybe the most powerful. Rich nations have successfully written really stringent IPR rules into international law.
And this is where the stakes become life and death. The sources cite the just horrific example of the HIV/AIDS crisis in Africa.
It really lays bare the moral dimension of all this. African governments wanted to use legal public health clauses to import generic life-saving drugs. We're talking 2 to 5% of the patented price.
And what happened?
41 global drug companies sued the South African government to stop them, to enforce their patent monopolies. They prioritized profit over millions of lives.
That's the ultimate cost. But the sources also show how IPR is used for just, simple corporate self-interest in the developed world.
Oh, absolutely. The famous Mickey Mouse Protection Act in the U.S. is the perfect example. It's not about encouraging innovation. It's about protecting existing profits.
Remind us what that did.
It was a 1998 law, heavily lobbied by Disney, that retroactively extended copyright terms. It was a massive giveaway to established corporations without generating a single new piece of art or technology. It shows you IPR is political. It favors incumbents.
And it can actually stop development, which is the whole patent thicket issue.
Correct. The patent thicket is this administrative nightmare of overlapping patents. The example they use is golden rice, a nonprofit technology to fight vitamin A deficiency.
Yeah.
To get that technology to people who needed it for free, for humanitarian use, researchers had to negotiate the rights for 70 different patents held by 32 different companies and universities. It's designed to be impossible.
Let's pivot to macroeconomics. Another pillar of the golden straitjacket is financial liberalization. But the instability that it created, the evidence you've brought is shocking.
It's a really stunning contrast. During the regulated period from about 1945 to 1971, the sources record zero banking crises in developing countries.
Zero.
Then, as soon as finances liberalized from 1973 to 97, you see 17 major banking crises and 21 twin crises, where the currency and the banks melt down at the same time. Liberalization brought chaos, not stability.
And beyond that chaos, there's this obsession with super low inflation, 1 to 3%. The sources challenge this by saying it's really a political choice, not an economic necessity.
Precisely. The research cited here is pretty robust. It shows there's really no systematic link between inflation and growth as long as inflation stays below a pretty high level, maybe 40% even.
Okay, so unpack that political mechanism for us. Why the obsession with 1% inflation? Who does that benefit?
Well, tight monetary policy means you have to have high real interest rates. So who likes high interest rates? People with fixed income assets. Banks, the financial sector, their wealth is preserved.
And who gets hurt?
Businesses that need to borrow to invest, and the general working population, because high interest rates kill investment and therefore job growth. It's a policy choice that quietly funnels wealth from labor and industry to finance.
And you see this play out in post-apartheid South Africa. Despite this huge unemployment crisis, the new ANC government adopted IMF-style policies. Real interest rates went through the roof to 10, 12%.
And the result was totally predictable. It crushed the investment they needed to create jobs. They chose to please international capital over solving the economic crisis for their own citizens.
And finally on this, we have to challenge that mantra of private is good, public is bad. The push for privatization seems to ignore some incredibly successful state-owned companies.
It really does. The poster child here is Singapore Airlines, SIA. It's consistently one of the world's best airlines, super efficient, consistently profitable, and it's 57% owned by the state.
Through their investment arm, Temasek.
Right, and Temasek controls tons of other successful global companies in things like semiconductors, engineering, shipping. And historically in Europe, many of the big names that drove modernization, Renault, Alcatel in France, were successful state-owned enterprises.
So the idea that state ownership automatically means failure is just not supported by the evidence.
Not at all. It depends entirely on how it's managed and what the strategic goals are.
Okay, let's spend a bit of time on the other barriers that are often thrown up. Culture and corruption. There's this neoliberal idea that certain cultures are just, better for development.
And it's just historically false. It's a way to blame the victim. In the mid-19th century, before Germany industrialized, the British press described Germans as thick-headed and heavy people. Sloth was seen as a German trait.
Wow. And the same was said about Japan, right? They were seen as lazy and uninventive.
Exactly. So what's the real relationship? It's that economic success changes the cultural perception, not the other way around. Once Germany and Japan got rich, the world reinvented the stereotypes. Suddenly, they were hardworking and brilliant. It's a story told in hindsight.
And then there's corruption. We hear constantly that it's the #1 reason poor countries stay poor, but the history of rich nations tells a different story.
A very different story. Many rich nations industrialized amidst levels of corruption that would be shocking today. In the UK, you could literally buy government offices and titles into the 18th century.
And in the U.S., the spoils system of political patronage was rampant during one of its fastest growth periods.
Right, so the question is, why didn't corruption stop them? But it supposedly cripples developing nations now.
And the key difference is, what? Capital flight.
That's the key. In the 19th century U.S., that corrupt money, while it was dirty, was mostly spent and invested inside the U.S., because global finance was restricted.
But today?
Today, thanks to open capital markets, a corrupt official can stash that money in a Swiss bank account or a London apartment in seconds. That stolen wealth leaves the country. It's capital flight, and it starves the local economy of investment.
Which brings us full circle back to this fundamentally unfair context of global competition, this idea of the level playing field.
It's an absurdity. To ask a country like Honduras to compete on equal terms with the U.S. is, well, the analogy in the sources is perfect. It's like making a heavyweight boxer like Muhammad Ali fight a lightweight like Roberto Duran with no weight classes.
The fight is over before it begins.
It is. The sources argue you need a tilted playing field for a while, like a handicap in golf, to let the weaker player build up their skills. Economic development is a marathon of capacity building, not a sprint against the world champ.
No, to circle back, the central finding is that for long-term development, governments have to prioritize that capacity, building, protecting infant industries. investing in tech over the short-term high of pure free market policies.
That's the bottom line.
And the most profound takeaway here might be the glaring double standard we see in a crisis. When the U.S. economy stumbles, after 9/11 or the dot-com bust, what does the government do?
It immediately deploys Keynesian policy. It runs massive budget deficits, sometimes 4% of GDP, to pump up demand and save jobs.
That's the recovery playbook for rich nations.
It is. Yet when South Korea faced its financial crisis in 1997, a crisis largely caused by the very financial liberalization the West had pushed on them, the IMF forced the Korean government to run a budget surplus.
A surplus during a massive recession. That's just guaranteeing mass layoffs and social collapse.
It is. And it makes you wonder, if budget deficits are essential for rich nations to recover, why are poor nations forced to do the exact opposite? Austerity that guarantees misery. It's no wonder some Koreans gave the IMF that bitter nickname. I'm fired.
So you have to ask yourself, whose agenda is being served when the ladder isn't just pulled up, but is actively kicked away?